Got it. It's okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Let's say hello to everybody in the audience. We're going live here. This is the fourth shiur in a series called Kabbalah for Rationalists. Although the title for this one doesn't have the term rationalists in it, but I'll explain to you why I think it's in that category as well. My name is Yoel Oz. I live here in Givat Shmuel. I studied Yeshiva University. I studied philosophy, general Jewish philosophy, and as I spoke in the previous shiurim that I gave, I knew nothing about Kabbalah. I went through smicha. Did the whole thing, kindergarten all the way to the end, and I didn't know anything. And so I felt that there was like a major gap in my knowledge and in my background. And so I wanted to say, okay, what is this stuff? Where do you start? What are the major questions? So the first shiur that I gave was on the topic of prophecy, because I think in any kind of religious system, even if you're a quote rationalist, Maimonidean, you're going to have to deal with a mystical element in terms of belief in revelation. If you're coming from an Abrahamic religion. The second was on the concept of the Or Ein Sof, and Or and the Ein Sof in general, light, as basic ideas. The other shiur that I gave, which was the last one, and now I'm blanking out exactly what it was that I taught. For those of you on YouTube, you can go and look at the previous shiur. Right now, it's slipping my mind. Maybe somebody here would remember what I spoke about, but it's not so relevant. But anyway, so when I gave my first shiur, I spoke about where do you start. So one of the main I'd say introductory works on Kabbalah, if you want just to get very clear understanding of the terminology, is Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's Inner Space. It's really just an excellent work, and I contrasted that with Gershom Shalom, the famous professor from Hebrew University, who had an introductory text called Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism. So I feel that those are the two places to start. So as I was going through Inner Space, one of the sources that Rabbi Kaplan, his footnotes are absolutely incredible. One of the sources that he's constantly referring to is a work called Pardes Rimonim. I didn't know what Pardes Rimonim was, so I went to a Sfarim store. One of the things that I do is I'm actually a book dealer. That's my primary occupation right now. And I went to a Sfarim store and I found Pardes Rimonim. And Pardes Rimonim is it's a classic work in Kabbalah, written by Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. Has anybody here heard of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero? Often referred to as the Ramak. Okay, that's good, because that's precisely where I'm coming from. I didn't know much about. I'd heard the name Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, but I didn't know really much about him. He was on the first page of your source sheet. You have a little bit of a biographical excerpt here about his life. Rabbi the Ramak lived in Tzfat. He was a major mikubal. If I had to ask you to name one major Kabbalist in Tzfat that had a major impact on later Jewish thought and Jewish life, who would you say? Dari. So, is that what you said? Ari Arizal, okay. Is the Rabbi Yitzchak Luria. So the Ari basically eclipsed the Ramak. The Ramak was really the major Kabbalist, the major figure in Tzfat. He died in 1570. We don't know exactly where he was born. He was a student of Rabbi Yosef Karo. He was married to the sister of Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. Anybody know who Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz is? The author of Lechadodi, also a very famous Kabbalist. He and the Ramak would go out into the fields, and they would do what were called the Gerushin, where they would just sort of read psukim and then see whatever inspiration came to them about the psukim. And the Ramak was an incredible person. We'll see in terms of the introduction to Kabbalah, he started studying Kabbalah around the age of 20, and he talks about what age should one go about studying Kabbalah, and what are the preconditions for studying it. And he died in 1570, and just before he died, there was a 2 to 3 month overlap where this mysterious figure from Egypt came. His name was Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and he used to sit around and he used to listen to the shiurim of the Ramak, and he would talk, but nobody knew who he was, and nobody knew what. And this was the Arizal. And the Arizal actually only lived for another 3 years after that. He died in 1573. And within those 3 years, he completely revolutionized the whole system of Kabbalah, to the point that we have the Kabbalah that's known as Kabbalah Ta'ari, the Kabbalah of the Arizal, which is a level that sort of takes the Kabbalah up until his point and takes it to another level based on some of the more hidden and difficult aspects of Sefer HaZohar. But Rav Moshe Cordovero, as a result, has sort of been, I wouldn't say forgotten. He's known certainly in academic circles, and the fact that he's called Ramak, very few rabbis get the terminology like Rambam, Rashba, Ritva, like Ramban. So he's known as the Ramak. The Ramak was outstanding. I mean, what he did for the Kabbalah was essentially what Rabbi Yosef Karo did for Halacha. Rabbi Yosef Karo took all of the Talmud and all of the writings of the Rishonim, and he wrote a commentary on the Tur Shulchan Aruch, the Arba Turim, and he wrote the Beit Yosef, his commentary on the Tur, and then from that he formed the Shulchan Aruch. Moshe Cordovero essentially did the same thing for the Kabbalah. He took the major sources of the Kabbalah, the Zohar, Sefer Yetzirah, some of the earlier texts, Sefer Abahir, and he systematized them. So when I talk about the Kabbalah for rationalists, one of the reasons that I find the Ramak very appealing is because he's very systematic. He's very analytic. He's very clear in terms of how he approaches things. But as a result of the interest in the Ari, and the Ari did a lot of work in terms of looking for people being mitake in their souls and reincarnation and all kinds of mystical stuff. The Ari was, if you read Shivchei HaAri, which is it was written a couple of decades after the Ari died, you'll get a sense of who this guy, who was wandering around the hilltops in the Galilee, was, and why it was that he revolutionized Jewish thinking, that it's completely changed and impacted everything that we have up until today. But the Ramak has unfortunately not gotten the same level of attention, and to the extent that so I was looking for some svarim of his, so I found a book from Torah Kabbalah by Moshe Cordovero. Hasn't been reprinted. It was printed in 1951, and by Moshe Rav Kook. You can see the paper is all brown and brittle, and if you know used bookstores, you know where to get this stuff. But the text that we're working on, though, is called Or Ne'erav. So when I started getting interested in the Ramak, I was posting a little bit about this on social media, and I said I was really interested in Pardes Rimonim, and that I was interested in the Kabbalah, the pre-Zohar Kabbalah and the pre-Ari Kabbalah. And I thought that because the Kabbalah existed before the Zohar and the Kabbalah existed before the Ari, but those were the two major revolutionary periods or figures or sets of works that had a dramatic reorientation of the Kabbalah. So the fact, we're dealing with, just a very basic level introduction, but then the level of where Kabbalah has developed and where it's gone to today, it's gone through numerous transformations. So I was interested in the pre-Zohar Kabbalah and the pre-Ari Kabbalah. And I was directed by Rabbi Dr. Alan Brill, who was a professor of mine at Yeshiva University. He's now a professor. He's written some great works on interreligious dialogue, Judaism and other religions. And he directed me towards a work called Or Ne'erav. So Or Ne'erav was actually, luckily, just republished. This is from Tafshin Pei Gimel, so that's like a year and a half ago. I had to go find a copy of it. I have a guy in Meir Sharim who will print on demand, out of print books. That was like a fun little experience. But it actually turned out that the work Or Ne'erav was actually translated into English. It's called Moshe Cordovero's Introduction to Kabbalah, an annotated translation of Or Ne'erav. Or Ne'erav is a more simple, not simple, but it's an introductory work dealing with the question of should you learn Kabbalah, what's involved in Kabbalah, what are some of the basic concepts. And it turns out that the author is actually the uncle of one of my best friends. So that was another nice little thing. But basically, what I found really interesting about the Ramak, there are a couple of figures that are named Rabbi Moshe. There's Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, there's Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, there's Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. They all have very, very similar characteristics in that they're all systematic kinds of thinkers. They take all the material that kind of came before them, and they put it together in like a whole that is easily understood. And then they also had writings that were meant for a broader audience. So they say that sometimes that if there are people who are brilliant, but they don't know how to teach and they don't know how to explain things. But the really, really, really brilliant people are the ones who can take the most complicated ideas and make them simple. And the Ramak, Ramchal, Rambam, that's really, the part of their greatness was their ability to take difficult ideas, take difficult things, and make them as almost, clear as the sun. So Or Ne'erav is dealing with the question of should one study this? He always calls it this chokhmah, chokhmah azot, and what are the advantages of it? What are the people who don't want? What I was most intrigued by was he starts off, and we'll go through it. He starts off with, why do people say that they don't want to study Kabbalah? So before you even go into the question of why study, is like, well, why do people not want to study it? So that's really where it will start. So I know the source sheets look long; there's 16 pages, but really it's because it's both in Hebrew and in English. Okay, so Or Ne'erav means pleasant light, and that's one of the things that you also get a feeling for when you open the works of the Ramak. There's just this incredible, just godliness. He uses the term study of Elohut or Elokut or Elokuyot, and they translate it here as theology. It's not really the right word. Theology is not really what it is. It's really studying godliness or the idea of God. And one of the things in this book, the Moshe Rav Cookbook. There's a funny thing, like the cookbook shuk after Pesach. They call it the cookbook shuk cookbook. So yeah, the Moshe Rav Cookbook has like a whole. It's organized also systematically. First section, Elohim. Okay, everything about Yichudo, Ritzono, Yediato. I'm not translating because I figure most of the people in this room know. Machshavto, Chochmato, Tuvo, Hashkachato. And then Sfirot, and then Malachim, and etc. So this book does a very good, clear taking from all the different writings of the Ramak and putting them also in an organized, systematic manner. And what I found is, and one of the things that I spoke about in one of my previous classes was we were talking about the Rambam and how the Rambam talks about negative theology, that you can't speak positively about God. You can only speak about what we don't know. Oh, now I remember what my last year was. It was on names of God. Names of God, and specifically the name Yud Kei Vav Kei. And we'll have a little bit about that at the end of this shir. And we talked a little bit about how the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim, Yud Kei Vav Kei is one of the few things that we actually can start talking about when we're talking about the infinite. But I personally find that what the Ramak does is sort of like where the Moreh Nevuchim leaves off, the Ramak kind of takes over it, and we'll see he's clearly well read in the Rambam, and he talks about the mitzvah of knowing God and loving God, and the way that the Rambam presents it as a mitzvah, and then he says, but we're going to go further. And I think that's one of the reasons that we have a lot of times difficulties with mysticism and with metaphysics, is that we're like, what can we really know? What can we really say? About God? And what these Kabbalists say is that we can start talking about God. We can start talking about how you get from the infinite to the finite. There's this gap. We know that there is this concept of the infinity, and we know there's this concept of ourselves that we're bound by time, matter, and space. But how do we get from up here to the world up there to the world down here, which is called hishtalshalut, or the yerida? And so we'll talk about at the end some of the basic concepts that exist within Kabbalah for how that hishtalshalut, how that connection from the infinite to this world really works. Okay, so let's begin. Do you guys want to do this in Hebrew, in English? Preference? All right, so maybe we'll do a little bit of both. Okay, so the first section of Ornei Rav, Chelek Aleph, is Beharchakat HaNezek HaOleh Al Dat HaMitrachakim Mechochma Zo. So here it translates the rectification of the harm incurred on account of the opinions of those who stay aloof from this science. Really, it means what the Ramak is saying is that people who don't study Kabbalah, that there's damage that's coming from this. And this was also something that was sort of like jarring. The first time I was hearing someone saying, no, you need to study this because if you don't, there's damage. There are things that you're not getting religiously, spiritually, that you really should be getting. So he divides them into three different groups. So is there anybody who would like to read page 2? Ra'inu hamitrachachim mechochma zo. Don't all jump out at once. You can read it in English also, it's fine. Can we do it in English? Somebody want to read it in English? Yeah, in English? Okay.
Wait, which one's
Page 2, those who shun this science.
Those who shun this science of Kabbalah can be divided into three classes. The first class comprises those who shun it because they think that there is no need to believe in the existence of an esoteric meaning of Torah.
Okay, so basically, what we're talking about is Torah Tasod. That there's the Torah that is Nigle, which we generally study, but then there's Nistar. So this is the question regarding Nistar. There are people who say that there's no need to either that it doesn't exist or that we don't have to study it. Keep going.
There are a number of reasons for their opinion. Some believe that the words of the Torah must be understood literally. Hence, they have no desire to comprehend the esoteric. Who indeed can force them to believe in the 10 Sefirot and the other aspects of this science?
Okay, right. So these concepts you probably have heard of the Sefirot. So the Ramak is already kind of jumping in. He's like, all right, you probably know Kabbalah has something to do with Sefirot, and if you're coming from the world of Nigla, you're like, what's the source of all of this? Why do I have to study these things? Where is this? This is not, the Sefirot are not mentioned in, let's say, explicitly in Aseret HaDibrot, for example. You may say, okay, there are 10 commandments, 10 Sefirot, there's a connection there, but it's clearly something that's not part of the, quote, revealed Torah. Go on.
Furthermore, they have no desire to transcend their belief in God's wondrous unity. When some aspect of this discipline comes before them, whether it concerns Ein Sof or the form of the Torah, they begin to denounce the enlightened Kabbalists who appear to them as little short of heretics.
Okay, so then let's take it even further. So it's not just that we're not into 10 Sfirot, but we are also skeptical that the idea that we're going to have, the Christians have a Trinity. One of the famous Rishonim, the Rivash said the Christians believe in 3 and the Kabbalists believe in 10. It was a famous criticism of them. So it's like, what do you mean 10? What is this? How is this, not a division within the unity of God? And many of the Maimonideans, the people who are anti-Kabbalah even to this day, they'll say, I don't want to have anything to do with this, any discussion that will in any way, shape, or form say that there's anything, any kind of corruption whatsoever within the unity of God. And it's not an accident, I believe, that most of the Kabbalists came from the world of non-Muslim territories, because I think that in Islamic territories, this would be very, very difficult. But I don't think that means that these are necessarily Christian. There's a reason Christians were interested in Kabbalah for these very reasons. But this is one of the things that's going on, and what the Ramak is saying is that they're calling us heretics, but really that's not the case. He calls themselves maskilim. We're the enlightened ones. So he's already dealing with this tension. Okay, yeah.
I wouldn't really say though that, well, at least from what I've heard, that the Rambam disagrees with Kabbalah.
So the Rambam is about 100 years before the Zohar comes about. People ask, well, why didn't the Rambam know the Zohar? It's like, because the Zohar was not revealed or was not published until the 1290s. And the Rambam died in 1204. So Kabbalah predates the Zohar. And the Kabbalists themselves, obviously, the whole question of the authorship of the Zohar, even according to those who say that it's from the time period of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, it was still hidden for 1,000 years. People did not know about it. What the Kabbalistic schools that were functioning in Spain and in Provence around the time of the Rambam and in the period after the Rambam, it was a very small group of people. They were passing texts around to each other in private. The two real main texts that people knew about were Sefer Yetzirah and Sefer Abahir. We're not exactly sure. Sefer Yetzirah is most probably from Mishnaic times. It's already quoted in the Gemara. Sefer Abahir, we don't know the origin of it. It's a very important and interesting question, but this was not something that was taught to the masses at all. This was what I talked about in the first class, that when it came to Maseh Merkava, that there are specific limitations and restrictions on who you're allowed to teach these things to. So the Rambam, he was familiar with a couple of Kabbalistic works, and he was familiar with a couple of Kabbalistic techniques, probably. He wasn't a fan. But Kabbalah, as we know it later on, really developed after the Rambam. So the Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim is working mostly in an Islamic philosophy context also. So he's dealing a lot with these questions of unity of God, and he's studied a lot of Al-Farabi, Ibn Rushd. The Rambam is coming from a different context. So people think of the Rambam as Greek philosophy. It's true, but the Greek philosophy as refracted through Islamic philosophy. So the Rambam is very much within an Islamic context. I don't know if that answered your question.
It wasn't really a question, it was more of a statement.
Okay. Okay. I don't know if it was a good response, but okay.
Just talking about Christianity, but Israel, in those times were under Islamic
So there were so basically around the period of in the Middle Ages, we're talking right now. Let's say so the Ramak is the period right after the Spanish expulsion. So it's the 1500s. Spanish expulsion is 1492. So they're in right. So they're in the Ottoman Empire. So most of these people. Cordovero means that his family most probably came from Cordoba, from Spain. We don't know where he was born. Rabbi Yosef Caro was born in 1491 in Portugal, but he was raised and learned in Turkey, and then they all somehow managed to find their way to Tzfat.
Islamic, like, imperial.
Right. So it was in the Ottoman Empire, and so that is the context. And within the Islamic world, there is a mystical group called the Sufis, and the Sufis they were active in Turkey, and Rambam's son, actually, Rabbi Avram ben Rambam, talks about the meditative techniques and practices of the Sufis, and he speaks about them positively. So the Sufism and Kabbalah, there is a lot as mystical traditions. They do have a lot in common. So by this point, I'd say in the Ottoman Empire, it wouldn't be so radical. And also, I mean, in Eretz Yisrael, I guess it's after the period of the Crusades. I mean, we're dealing. The Crusades really are the 1100s, 1200s. Perfect. It's complicated, and people, it's like Salah ad-Din and King Richard the Lionheart. They met each other in Jerusalem in 1187, and who was Salah ad-Din's doctor? The Rambam. You had these two kings, the leader of Islam and the leader of Christianity, fighting with each other with the sword, and then they had, the doctor, the Jew, who was, doing philosophy, writing halacha, making a living as a doctor. And where we are today. So we've been in conversation with Christianity and Islam for 1,400, 2,000 years. And we're still in conversation. Okay, let's move on to the next section. Somebody else want to read? I think English is good. Somebody else would like to?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
There is a second group which avoids this science with various arguments, though all its members admit the eminence of the discipline. Some say that not all are worthy to enter into the study of such sublime wisdom. They even imagine in their zealousness for the Lord of hosts and his Torah that they must punish those who pursue it, since they feel that the Kabbalists have dared to deal with matters divine beyond the ken of most people. Okay, so this is another thing you'll hear about regarding Kabbalah. It's only for a very small group of people. Yes, okay, it's holy. Yes, there's something to it, but it's not something that's supposed to be taught to the masses. And after the Shabtai Tzvi apostasy and the period and the Sabbatean messianic controversies and crisis, that was when the people know about the Cherem not to study Kabbalah until the age of 40. That came after Shabtai Tzvi. There were still people who mention, and the Ramak's going to mention, those who say that you shouldn't study it before 40. He says the age of 20. It's fairly clear that that's what he did. And there are still some limitations that he puts and prerequisites in terms of studying Kabbalah. But he thinks that it's something that should be started earlier. After the Shabtai Tzvi catastrophe, they put the Cherem in that nobody should study Kabbalah before the age of 40 unless they were married. Ramchal, for example, was younger than 40 and was unmarried, and he was clean shaven. That was one of the reasons that he was considered very controversial in his time. There were people who suspected him of being Sabbatean, and he wasn't. And he wrote a book completely criticizing the Sabbatean movement, but it was something that people were very conscious of. The Frankist movement that took over Sabbatean ideas in Poland in the 1700s, and which was really antinomian and was really Shabtai Tzvi was most probably just not well. I think that he was probably mentally ill. Yaakov Frank was a real scoundrel. He was really like he was a cult leader. And the Baal Shem Tov and Hasidism starts around the same time as Yaakov Frank. And so a lot of the controversy regarding Hasidut and the later cherem that's put on the circle of the Baal Shem Tov is coming out of this Shabtai Tzvi, post Shabtai Tzvi, Yaakov Frank situation. And it's all related to, do you teach Kabbalah to the masses? And so the Hasidim, particularly, so the people who study the Kabbalah of the Ramak and the Kabbalah of the Ari is actually Chabad. Chabad Hasidut takes a lot of the Kabbalah of the Ramak and the Kabbalah of the Ari, and the Alter Rebbe synthesized the two systems and provided a system through the Tanya and through some other writings that is sort of, teaching the Kabbalah to, or the basic ideas of Kabbalah to general Hasidim. We can talk about that maybe another time. But
when was Shabtai Tzvi?
Shabtai Tzvi, 1666.
That's a devilish year.
Yes, it was, and it's not a coincidence that it was that year. There were many people who were saying that that's when, not just in the Jewish world, that people were expecting something. So it was like that moment, that guy with the historical time period dealing with Lurianic Kabbalah, post-Spanish Inquisition, and the Conversos, the Moranos, and also it was the period of the Commonwealth in England, the period between the monarchies. That's also it was a very, very, very tumultuous time. So Shabtai Tzvi is 1666, they're 1570s, and Hasidut, Baal Shem Tov dies in 1760. So that's sort of like the centuries. Okay, let's continue.
These matters, they say, must not be dealt with by men of little worth. When one presses them regarding the ancients who pursued the subject, they reply, "Who are we in comparison with them, the holy ones on the earths, that we should deal with these lofty mysteries?"
Okay, so how it's so amazing, it's so high, so who are we? We're Ketanim. How can we look at this? Go on.
Then there are those who assert that delving into this science is truly worthwhile. However, they further state that this subject requires a qualified teacher, and in their opinion, no teacher exists who has penetrated to the very depths of this discipline.
Okay, so now it's like, okay, you need a teacher, and I need this, and it's sort of giving, all of the different reasons and excuses why not to study it. And so then skip to the next paragraph.
There are also those who imagine that before pursuing Kabbalah, they must first master the science of astronomy.
All right. Okay. So now, not only do you have to find the right teacher, and that it's too lofty, but before you come to this, you need to know science, which is interesting because most people, when they think of Kabbalists, they don't think about people studying astronomy. But the Ramak was clearly one of these types who was well versed and knowledgeable in what would be considered secular disciplines. He was a genius. He was brilliant, and he'll talk about. We're gonna have to move fast. He'll talk about the study of science and astronomy and other things as part of the way of attaining love and knowledge of God, but also he says the Sfirot and also the Kabbalistic system. Keep going.
They have other notions which keep them from following the straight path. They sanctimoniously give themselves the excuse that their bellies are not yet full of the bread and meat of the Gemara. For these poor people, their entire lives will not be sufficient to learn even a bit of Gemara, let alone to fill their bellies so that they could partake of this science and be saved.
Okay, so he also has some harif words to say, but he basically says, they're like, okay, I need to, before I jump into Kabbalah, and he says later on, yes, you need to have learned Gemara, you need to have learned Halacha, you need to have some basic grounding in Pilpul, in classical traditional Jewish texts. Madonna going and studying Kabbalah is not something that the Ramak is advocating. Maybe Madonna's getting something out of it. Maybe that's part of the, what Hasidism was also bringing the Kabbalah to the people. But it's also one of the reasons for the controversy around it. But he's saying, okay, until I learn a little bit more Gemara and a little bit more and a little bit. So at what point, have you said, okay, I mean, do I have to go through all of Shas and all of Poskim before I can, go in and start exploring this? He keeps calling it this science, ha-chokhmah hazot. That's how they keep referring to it. So I'll tell you, I started when I was about 38. I was like, I'm not waiting until 40. I was like, all right, I want to know. I started actually a little bit earlier, and then I stopped and then around 38 was really when I started. So these three types. Okay, concerning people of these three types.
Concerning people of these three types, we may say that, although their intention is to exalt this science, they are truthfully not qualified to speak of it.
So he's saying this is he's going to say this, that a lot of people who say that they don't want to study Kabbalah, they've never learned Kabbalah, so they don't know what it is that they're not studying. That was one of the things that I felt. And so he said, who should come and testify? One who has not observed the moon, or one who has? Meaning that it's a statement in halacha is who is pasul to give edut? Mi shelo ra'ah hayareach yavo v'ya'id, or mi shera'u. Somebody, have you seen the moon, or have you not seen the moon? So these are people who have not seen the moon. Keep going.
True it is that this science is sublime and exalted, as we will yet indicate with God's help. However, concerning these people and their ilk, you must say that they are those who speak of you with deliberate evil.
Okay, that's harsh.
Of them it is said, wisdom is too high for a fool. He dare not open his mouth in the gates. It is also written, the conceited man seeks wisdom, yet finds none. To one of understanding, knowledge comes easily. It is also written, I love those who love me, those who search for me find me.
Right. So he quotes all different psukim. I mean, in Hebrew, it's even a little bit sharper. But he clearly this is a polemical work. He's arguing why this should be studied, and he thinks that the people who are against it, and that was also one of the things that I found very striking about the Ramak was he was aggressive. Like, you don't usually see that. Okay, next section. Third group. Another volunteer? Someone from this side? It's English, people. You want to read it in Hebrew, it's also fine. Yesh kat shlishit. Yeah, or nerav, bottom of page 3.
There is a third group which shuns this science on the grounds that man is liable to err in such matters and possibly come to sin, falling into one of the errors which appertain to this lofty area. The intentions of this group are certainly good. However, their actions are not acceptable. They are indeed correct when they say that man is liable to err in these recondite matters. Nonetheless, even if one does err, he will not incur sin.
Okay, so he's basically saying, and this is the truth, and he's going to give examples of it. That one of the problems is that there's a lot of talk of anthropomorphism, God describing God in physical terms, and as we said, this whole idea of 10 versus unity, and so people, the third objection is that people might come to, as he said, there are people who say that, okay, people are going to do that. And he's saying that it is a legitimate objection. Okay, so I'm gonna read a little bit further on because I want to make sure we get some ground covered. So he then says, having sufficiently discussed, this is on page 4, those who stand aloof from the science, and having refuted their opinions, so this is later on, I skipped all the parts where he refutes them, as God has helped us, we will now explain how those who cultivate should be motivated in order to be accepted by their master. We say we know of 3 groups of those who cultivate Kabbalah. One of these errs, one sins, and one is worthy. Okay, so in Hebrew, it's v'hinei hakata to'eh. All right, the erring group is comprised of some people in our time who have no preparation in either scripture, Mishnah, or Gemara, and yet pursue this science. So he says that these are people who are making mistakes. That yes, if you want to come study Kabbalah, okay, fine, but if you haven't studied Tanakh, Mishnah, or Gemara, or Halacha, this is you shouldn't be jumping into this. There is no doubt that they are completely in error from several perspectives. Never in their lives have they seen the light of pilpul. So pilpul meaning in Talmudic analysis, the ability to ask questions, to make conclusions, and to derive answers from different types of arguments. They have deviated from the straight path and have taken up the way of the non-allegorical understanding of this science until they are nigh to the error of imagining physicality in heavenly beings. So people who have not gotten to this level of intellectual sophistication, they are going to come to one of these problems where they're going to be talking about God in corporeal, physical senses. This error has befallen them because they have not been sufficiently prepared by their studies and have thus followed the plain meaning of statements. They understand things literally. If we understand things literally, you are going to end up in problems in Kabbalah, thinking that they were not allegories. Everything that, and you're going to hear this over and over and over, it's all a mashal. And that's sort of, we're using language to try to talk about, things that we don't have language for. That's part of the problem. The Rambam says, okay, those things which you can, this is anybody who's studied Wittgenstein, we're talking about linguistics, philosophy of language, that about which we cannot speak, we must remain silent. That's the famous line from Wittgenstein. The Kabbalists say, no, we can have mystical, we can have metaphysical knowledge of some sort. Okay? This error has befallen them because they have not been sufficiently prepared by their studies. They did not get to the bottom of the matter. This has caused many students who are worthy of studying Kabbalah to distance themselves from it and overthrow its yoke, despising the way taken by these devotees. The slogan in the mouth of this group is that this science has no need of pilpul and questions. They have closed the gates of understanding for themselves and walk in darkness. So the people who say no, this is also a very important principle. The Kabbalistic frame of mind and the Talmudic frame of mind, when you study a text of the Zohar, when you study a text of the Talmud, it's two different types of thinking. When you're studying the text of the Talmud, it's always, what does this mean? How do I understand this? Is this contradicted by another Gemara? How do I understand this in the context of this other Breita? Or and I'm question after question after question and constantly asking critical thinking questions. In Zohar, it's kind of like, okay, it says wild things, and so there are those who will say that, and this is where the Ramak is kind of different than other Kabbalists, because he does approach the Kabbalistic issues analytically and asking questions and in a more kind of like philosophical, lumdish kind of way, but he's different, and I think it's also one of the reasons that the path of the Arizal, it was actually probably more popular because it's less along the lines of these asking questions analytically, this and that and the other, and I think, and rightfully so, you end up in situations today where people do believe things very very literally. The slogan in the mouth of this group is that this science has no need of pilpul. Okay, they have closed the gates of understanding for themselves and walk in darkness. Okay, then the next group, we're on page 5. The sinful group are those who cultivate Kabbalah because they think of themselves as great sages whose only lack is the mastery of this science. So this is my hate. So it's like, okay, I don't know anything about this. I should know something about it, because if I'm a student, you should at least know something. So he says this is a sinful group, that it's like that they're just studying it just so that they will be shown off as, knowledgeable people. I was doing it more because I felt like I shouldn't be an ignoramus. But in order that they be considered absolutely perfect in all knowledge, they have decided to pursue this subject a bit. They rationalize their defect by saying, shall an inferior person speak before a sage like me, and I be unable to answer? So there's the idea that some of it is gaiva, and some of it is ego. After all, it is also my portion. On top of this rationalization, they possess an inordinate amount of pride. Moreover, they do not study Kabbalah for its own sake. To acquire a bit of this science is the same in their eyes as acquiring a smattering of medicine, astronomy, logic, mathematics, and other sciences. As you can see already, again, so the Ramak he's aware of like a liberal arts education. This is a university, like he's already talking in these terms. Now, the worthy group, on middle of page 5, The worthy group consists of those who take the straight path and have a portion in the mastery of Scripture, a portion in Gemara and its laws, which we consider to be Mishnah, and a portion of this science of Kabbalah. So Gemara and Halacha, and now have elements of Kabbalah. They study it for its own sake in order to enter into its mysteries, to know their master, to achieve wondrous level in the true acquisition of knowledge of the Torah. It's also, I want to understand Torah better. I want to understand Torah deeper. They also study it in order to pray before their master and to unify him through their performance of his commandments. This idea of doing yichudim, that's another subject. And how to properly worship Hashem. I know truly that such a person will go on his way with security. Such a person, he's going to have success. When he lies down, he will not fear, for his master will faithfully inform him of matters in the divine Torah that none who preceded him had attained. For each soul has a special portion of the Torah. Now you're already beginning to hear some of the Ramaks. He was being very critical and making a little, snarky comments. Now you're already beginning to hear some of his lofty, the exalted kind of language. Every single person has a special portion in the Torah. There is no man who attained a limitless knowledge of all of it, with the exception of Moses, our rabbi, peace be upon him. You can. Moshe is the top level. Moreover, the Holy One, blessed be He, did not inform even him of the entire Torah in its generalities and specifics. So even Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even know everything. In the name of the sages, holding various opinions, the students who were to expound it. Even Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know everything. Yes, go ahead.
But that's a contradiction of what he literally just said. He said,
With the exception.
With the exception of Moshe.
Moshe, he said, there is no man who attained a limitless knowledge of all of it, with the exception of Moshe. So he's saying Moshe did attain all the Torah, and then in the next line he says, but he didn't. So what does he mean by that?
So I think he's saying that Moshe is probably the highest level that one can attain, okay. But he's without, like, he's trying to both elevate Moshe and also say, but even Moshe didn't know everything. Yeah. Right? Without, not like he first wants to praise Moshe, but then he wants to say that Moshe was still a human being and Moshe still didn't know everything. Like,
also, can I ask?
Yes, go ahead.
On the second line of the English there,
yeah,
it says it talks about when you need to have a portion of scripture, a portion in Gemara and its laws, which we consider to be Mishnah. What does that mean?
Okay. So he really means the Rambam, Mishnah Torah. He'll talk about that later. He considers the Rambam Mishnah. Mishnah is the form of halakha, but we don't do halakha from the Mishnah. But the style of the Rambam is the Mishnaic style. Okay. But it's not, Mishnah style is not with pilpul and questions. It's halakha psuka. But remember, he's before the Shulchan Aruch. Right. So the Shulchan Aruch was his friend. The author of the Shulchan Aruch, or his friend, his teacher. Okay. On the obligation, page 6, he says, okay, having saved the reader from the influence of arguments preventing him from pursuing the science and obtaining the truth, we come to a brief second part, which is an exposition of the obligation to study it. On the obligation of the enlightened to study theology. Again, here it's Elohiyut. It's godliness, I think. Okay? There is no doubt that one of the things the Torah commands is for man to understand his creator according to his intellectual level. So you have to know God, you have to understand God. As it is written, I am the Lord your God. Rabbi Moses ben Maimon dealt with this commandment at the beginning of his book, Mishnah Torah, Yesodei Torah 1:1. The foundation of foundations and the pillar of the sciences is to know that there exists a first cause, which brought into being all that exists in heaven and earth. We need cite no further. That's the first halacha in the Rambam, and he said, and the Rambam has it. Okay, simply just knowing that there is a first cause. So he says there can be no doubt that the intention of Rabbi Moses, the Rambam, was to include in this commandment the command to understand the order of being stemming from him as far as human understanding can comprehend. This can be proven from the length of his explanation of the matter, which encompasses 2 entire paragraphs. It is also included in his brief statement. Here he goes into the whole. I'm not going to go into it because of time, but all the things that the Rambam includes in terms of what are parts of Yediat Hashem and how to do it. But he's basically saying if you go down to the second last line. He says that in order to serve God properly, one needs to acquire knowledge concerning him, that is, knowledge of his sfirot, his conduct with them, and his unification with them. So this is not what the Rambam says, but he's taking, again, like where the Rambam leaves off, he goes further. Next, page 7. Here he explains, again, this is continuing with the Rambam's, the Rambam Hilchot Yesodei Torah. He explained the knowledge of the motion of the spheres with divine force and direction constitutes the positive commandment. Again, the Rambam, knowledge of God comes from also certain astronomical principles, certain Aristotelian metaphysical principles. He says, if this is so, then no Israelite should neglect to acquire this knowledge according to its fundamentals, each according to his capacity. The beginning of knowledge in these matters consists in general in these findings. Afterwards, one may increase his observance of this commandment according to the greatness of his intelligence and knowledge. So when it comes to knowledge of God, you're constantly growing and getting more and more and more. It never ends. The mitzvah of Yediat Hashem, knowledge of God, is something that because we're dealing with the infinite, it's something that will go on and on and on and on. The next section, he talks about the intent of our non-Kabbalist predecessors is partially correct and near to this subject, except that they did not take the path of the sphirot, but rather dealt with God's providence over the spheres according to their understanding. Okay, so again, we're short on time. So the Ramak here is dealing with this question that, okay, they're dealing with it in a non-Kabbalistic form, but I'm saying that here the knowledge of God is included in the content of Kabbalah. Besides the mitzvah of Yediat Hashem, next, so b'zulad zeh yesh od mitzvot she'i efshar lekayman al tikunam im lo b'yediat haTorah v'chokhmah haniflet hazot v'hein ahavato v'ahavat Hashem v'yirato. So it's not just knowledge of God, but you have to have love of God. You have to have fear of God. So all of this that you have in terms of love of God, fear of God, these are principles that, if you just stay at the negative theology level, you don't attain these things. The Rambam says that you attain Ahavat Hashem through Limud Torah and through study of science and through the study of nature. And the Ramak would agree with that. The Ramak is, I would say, one of the Kabbalists who would not say that you shouldn't study philosophy and that you shouldn't study general disciplines. But all of these things, the purpose of them is to further develop in Yediat Hashem and Ahavat Hashem. Now he's going to say on page 8, the person who makes a mistake. Hinei ha'ani choshev ki ha'eloah hu zaken. Okay, a poor man thinks that God is an old man. As it is written, the Ancient of Days sits, that he has white hair because of his great age, because it is written, the hair of his head like pure wool, and that he sits on a marvelous throne of fire which gives off flashes. As it is written, his throne was fiery flames. These are all terms, atik yomin, and the kisei hakavod. These are later things that the Kabbalists all talk about. But it's like, if you think that God is an old man with a white beard sitting in heaven, you don't understand anything. And the fact that, and this is a very, very fundamental problem, I'd say, certainly in Christian, some Christian-influenced societies, that they have an impression of God as being God the Father, as an old man with a white beard. It's true that in Kabbalah it has languages like Atik Yomin and Arich Anpin and things, with the beard but it's not literal. That's very, very, very important. Okay, the next section is the time of study. Yeah, I knew I was going to run out of time. The time of study, the manner of study, and superiority, page 11, the superiority of this science to the other portions of our Holy Torah. Okay, so let's just do a couple on page 12, what he believes are some of the basic principles of Kabbalah that a person needs to know. First of all, the beginner must know that the Creator, Ein Sof, is one and has no second. So here he's clearly coming out of the Rambam world. He is the cause of causes and the prime mover, which is straight out of the Moreh Nevuchim. He is not one in the numerical sense, for the concepts of mutation and change in form and multiplicity do not apply to him. One is rather a word utilized by way of parable and likeness, since the number one stands by itself and is the beginning of each number, all numbers being contained within it in potential, while it is a part of every number in actuality. When they call the Creator may be blessed one, it is in this manner, that the Creator may he be blessed is found in all things in actuality, while all things are found in him in potential. Okay, so now it's getting into what is meant by achdut. So it's achdut, ein sof, infinite. This is a principle. Okay, now the beginner, next page 13. Now and this is what we had talked about in the previous class that I had forgotten that we talked about names of God. So the different names of God in Kabbalah are related to the different spheres. So the beginner needs to know that these divine qualities possess holy names which may not be erased. So that we know that there are Shemot Kodesh, so names like Ehyeh, Rasher Ehyeh, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Kel, Elokim, Hashem Tzvakot, Ado, and Nai. And each one of these in the Kabbalistic system are related to different sphirot. So Ehyeh is Keter, Ka is Chachma, Yud Kei Vav Kei, with the punctuation of Elokim is Bina. Kel is Chesed, Elokim is Gvura, Tiferet is Yud Kei Vav Kei, Tzvakot is Netzach and Yesod, Kel Chai or Shakai is Yesod, and Malchut is Adni. And this is obviously, this is an introduction to Kabbalah. He's giving you the key, terms. You could spend, many years of your life delving into each one of these things, what it means, understanding them, understanding the relationship between the different spheroids, understanding the deeper relevance of all these different names of God. But essentially what we're talking about is different attributes of God. We have a notion of attributes of God, and the Ramak wrote another work called Tomer Devora, which is a short work, which was the Bali Musar appropriated it, because what he does is one of the ways of developing yourselves in terms of character development is imitatio Dei, trying to imitate God, trying to be like God. How do you be like God? Be like His attributes. So, what attributes? The attributes of God in the sphere. Then on page 14, you guys can look at this a little bit. Now it's a little bit more about the Hishtalshalut, going from Ayin, from nothingness, into Yesh. So how do you get from Ayin into Yesh, and the and how the different spheroids are connected to that? What is Keter? Keter is, if you think about it like, the parts of the brain, Chachma is right brain, Bina is left brain, Keter would be the cerebral cortex, the prefrontal cortex, and it would be, or it would be the back, and it would be like this thing that's kind of like hovering over, and it's kind of like, it's actually, this is where your free will is physically located, and it's like, it's in this world connected between the infinite and the finite. So when we do things, this is my drush. When we do things that are creative, or we have the spark of creativity that comes from Chachma, that is coming from Keter, we're taking something from the infinite and we're bringing it into the world of finitude. First through Chachma and that spark of creativity, then Bina in terms of analysis, and then it's brought into emotions, and so this is what's going on in terms of there. The next section, he talks about the structure of the spherotic tree, what's called the Ilan or the Eitz HaChaim, which you probably have seen demonstrations of. Again, this is all meant to be an introduction, so I'm not going through all of the pieces, but on page 15, very important, I know I'm out of time. The beginner must also know that these spherot have no physical location. God forbid, though we ascribe form to them in order to render them intelligible. However, the truth is that Ein Sof is the locus for its 10 emanated spherot, and Keter is the locus of 9 spherot, and Chachma is the locus of 8 spherot. Again, this gets a little bit more complicated, but his point is these are all mishalim. It doesn't exist in space. The spherot are not like, somewhere up there's this cascading system. The bottom of page 15, this is the balance between love and judgment, between chesed and gvura. People will talk about this like the yin and the yang. This exists in other traditions. Chesed is small small doche yamin mikarevet. This always having to have this, balance between justice and mercy. Most of us know this about the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei is the name of Rachamim. The name of Elokim is Gvura, is Din, is Mishpat. Okay? And then finally on the last page 16, is where he talks about the 4 olamot. And with this I'll stop. This is a teaser for further studying of Kabbalah. The 4 olamot are what are called Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiyah. Asiyah is the world that we live in. If you think about the Asher bara Elohim la'asot, that God created the world to do and to make, we live in the world of Asiyah. The world of Yetzira is the world of Yesh Meyesh. It's the world of the Malachim. It's a world of creation, but it's a creation that is working from something that already exists. Bria, Bereshit bara Elokim, God is creating Yesh Me'ayin. Bria is from nothingness into somethingness, and then Atzilut, and this is the one thing. So the Rambam has Bria, Yetzira, and Asiyah in the Moreh Nevuchim, and he talks about these terms. Atzilut is not something that the Rambam has. Atzilut is the olam of the Sfirot, and really what it means, Atzilut as in Etzel, or it says Vayatzel min haruach, that God took from the spirit that was on Moshe and he gave it to the Shivim Zekanim. Atzilut is, in modern Hebrew, it's something that's like noble, atzili, it's exalted. We don't have language, Atzilut, we don't have language to describe it, but it basically means something out there. And just to end, I talked about Chabad a little bit. The Baal HaTanya, he actually has a song, a nigun called Nigun Daled Bavot, the four gates, and they're really each level is it starts low, it goes higher, and it rises. One level is the world of Asiyah, then the level of Yetzira, and then the level of Bria, and then the level of Atzilut, and it's like it goes higher and higher and higher, and then what the Hasidim is that he took this concept in Kabbalah and he translated it into a musical experience. I recommend, if you have a chance, search on YouTube Arba Bavot, Daled Bavot. It's a Chabad nigun, and you'll see, when it hits that that 4th level, it will take you into really into other worlds. So that's the idea. I think it's a pleasant light. It's something that, again, the rationalist side of me, the philosopher side, is asking the questions: why? What does this mean? How do we understand it? The Ramak is the one who actually he goes through a lot of all these things. With the Arizal, you're really into outer space. But this is a good sort of introduction for, I think, someone who has questions. Okay, what is all this stuff? There's definitely something here. There's something to be said. He thinks that it's worthwhile studying. You should probably learn some Gemara and Halacha and some science and other things first. But don't be too afraid to go down the path of studying and inculcating godliness.
Thank you.
Questions? Okay. All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.